I assume you're speaking of the Amy Bishop
The
case
Amy Bishop
from
case.
Braintree. Was that, did you think that was more the fault of the Braintree department not prosecuting, or was that solely on the DA's office?
Look, the decision to prosecute or not to prosecute is the DA's office.
Yeah.
And so that's where the responsibility lies on the decision not to prosecute, is on the DA's office. Right. And let me say, the DA's office is the DA's office. There shouldn't be any finger pointing against individuals. The DA's office makes the decisions, and the DA's office has to live with it. And that decision was a bad one, not to prosecute. And I think it reflects that there wasn't a prosecutor mentality in charge. At the Middlesex DA's office, I was on the search warrant beeper for 6 years. That meant there were periods when 24 hours a day for a week, I was on call, and I would be summoned. Every single homicide, the prosecutor would be summoned to the scene to help the police in the investigation. I wrote those search warrants. I've been to many scenes of murders to assist in the investigation. That's what a prosecutor does. There should have been no reason for a prosecutor to say, the police didn't tell us. There should have been a prosecutor on the scene.
Does that happen all the time? Does a prosecutor always get called out to the scene of a homicide?
It depends how the DA runs the office. In Middlesex, that's what happens. In Middlesex, prosecutors are the district attorney, and that's the system in operation. That wasn't the case in Norfolk County.
Is it now? Do you know?
No, it's not.
No.
That's one of the things that I would beef up and change. Is there is a telephone number the police can call if they want assistance, if they have questions to ask. But a person on call who's trained in investigation and search warrants and will go to the scene of every serious crime, including homicides, that doesn't exist, and it will exist when I'm district attorney.
Do you know offhand how many assistant DAs there are in Norfolk?
There's around 60, and there's
60?
around 60 additional staff people.
Is that enough?
Well, the practicality is the budget doesn't allow for more, and it won't in these circumstances.
Yeah.
You know, for the past 3 years, the DA's office has had its budget cut, either kept steady or cut for 3 years. That isn't true. If that was true across the board in this economy, that'd be understandable. But the public defenders, the last budget for the public defenders went up 33%. That's not a small increase, that's a huge increase. And if you're cutting the DAs while you're increasing the public defenders, that's like unilateral disarmament.
What does that say about our value system?
Well, what does it say about the politicians who are setting those budgets? Because Massachusetts is the only state that makes its district attorneys go hat in hand to the legislature and beg for the money. We're the only state that does that.
Yeah.
And the two opponents I have in the race, one of them is in the House Ways and Means Committee in the State House. The other one is on the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate. They're both on the committee that sets the budgets. And those are the committees that have cut or held steady the DA's budget while increasing the public defender's budget. It's disarming the DAs unilaterally, and it really is, it's threatening public safety, the budget cuts to the DAs. Promises were made to the DA's office about increases. The federal stimulus money, the DAs were promised, you're going to get part of that stimulus money. The promise was broken. The DA's offices didn't get it. That's in the legislature's lap. My two opponents are both coming from the legislature. They're both on the budget setting committees. And now they want to be in charge of the DA's office. I think we have enough politicians serving as district attorney in Norfolk County. It's time to try a prosecutor, someone who's done it before, and that's what I've been doing.
But for the last number of years that you were assistant DA, you worked in child abuse.
Child abuse is a priority of mine, absolutely.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, we had on this show a woman who works in the Darkness to Light program, which is regarding prevention of child abuse and awareness in noticing the signs and symptoms, which is a fabulous program. So it's been a forefront of ours here on this show as well.
Well, you know, it's a much more pervasive problem than anyone knows.
And you know, we went through statistics on child abuse, and it's astounding.
Well, can I just tell you?
It's just astounding.
I've done dozens of child abuse Superior Court trials. And when you impanel a jury on a child abuse trial, each potential juror has to go up individually to the judge and the lawyers and answer, have you ever been the victim of child abuse? And when you stand at those, they're called sidebar conferences with each individual juror, it's confidential, no one else can hear, and they're under oath. They have to answer under oath. And you wouldn't believe how many people in the jury pool, suddenly they're being asked something they've never had to answer under oath before. And we lose half the jury pool sometimes with people who either have been abused themselves or know a close family or friend member who was abused. It's a very pervasive problem. It's eye-opening to
Why would that be a cause to dismiss them?
Well, you want
people to be, if a defendant has a right to trial by a jury of his peers, would not, do you ask them if they were a child abuser?
Sometimes the potential jurors do come forward and they say, I think I could still serve fairly. They're almost always excluded from the jury if they say yes. But you want a jury that's fair and impartial, and the survivors of child abuse, they may try to be fair, but it impacts you the rest of your life, and I think it would be emotionally difficult for a jury member to...
I would think it's very difficult even to impanel a jury for a child abuse case by finding people who are unbiased against it, one way or the other.
It is. It takes a long time
It's
compared to other cases. It does.
Sure.
It does.
Yeah. Oh, I would be hard-pressed to be unbiased. I know exactly how I feel about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Child abuse, I focus on it a lot, but I really think if a DA's office has a well-run child abuse unit, you can be pretty sure the whole DA's office is going to be well-run because they're difficult cases to prosecute. And
what's the other most difficult cases to prosecute in the DA's office?
Well, I always think the priority needs to be on victim crimes.
Victim crimes.
And obviously, the most heinous victim crime is murder, where the victim is, no one can speak for the victim because they've been killed. But there's family members, there's friends. Someone's got to stand up for those people. And that should be an experienced district attorney. I've handled first-degree murder appeals in the Supreme Judicial Court. I've been called to the scenes of murders. In the mid-1990s, there was a murder in Newton. There was a Russian scientist who was here on an exchange program, and he was put in an apartment with another scientist from Ukraine. I guess nobody knew that Ukrainians and Russians don't necessarily get along. The Ukrainian scientist killed the Russian scientist. I was called to the scene to write the search warrant for the crime scene. And it was always my policy to get that done as quickly as possible because I felt like we can't ask the police to ask for assistance on these investigations if we're going to make them wait 4 or 5 hours. So I had a policy of get the warrant in hand within 2 hours to the police after they request it. So by the time that I had finished that warrant, the body was still at the apartment. The ME had been there, but the body was still at the apartment. And he was laying on the floor. He had a backpack on his back, and he had just announced he was going to jog to the Watertown Mall, as he had done frequently. And when we went into his bedroom to conduct the search, we found out what he was buying at the Watertown Mall, because he did that all the time, jog to the Watertown. He didn't have a car. And he would bring his purchases home in the backpack. Every drawer in his bedroom was filled with unopened boxes of Barbie dolls and unopened Starburst fruit chews, because he had 3 little girls back home in Russia he was going home to, and he was buying things for them to bring home that they didn't have. And of course, he never went home to them. That gives you an idea of the difference between Middlesex County and Norfolk County compared to the Amy Bishop case. I was on the scene assisting. The first assistant district attorney was on the scene. Later at the police station, District Attorney Tom Riley was on the scene. So that was around noon when I was working on the search warrant. Later that night, we were still at the police station working on the investigation, and it became known that nobody had called the widow. The police hadn't called the widow. The employer hadn't called the widow. The State Department program that brought him here as an exchange person hadn't called. And Tom Riley, who was he's a man of decency and integrity. It's not necessarily the DA's job to call, but he knew it was his job that night. Yeah. And I was with him when he called that widow. It impacted him and it impacted me. It was a model for me. That's the district attorney I want to be, who will call the widow at night.